Welcome, welcome. So let me turn on the chat here. So we are going to talk about the canter, improving the canter. This is a masterclass that we hold once a month in our Ritterize membership. And because it's Christmas season, holidays. That's why this is part of our little advent calendar. We have opened this up today for everybody. So welcome everyone, whether you're in the Ritterize group or not. But if you're interested in joining, we do this sort of thing every month. We choose a topic and then we'll go a little bit into some detail on some subject. Yeah, so today I wanted to talk a little bit about the canter. You've probably all heard the opinion that you can't really improve the canter, or the walk, but that you can improve the trot. That's not totally true. It is possible to improve the canter, but it takes time. And it takes a little skill, a little knowledge. You have to kind of know how to do it. If you have a horse that doesn't have a good canter, then you have to kind of look at whether the reason for the bad canter is conformation, breeding. There are breeds that are notorious for having difficult canters. Others, are known for having good canters. But you could also have a horse that was born with a good canter and was ridden by somebody in a way that destroyed the canter or deteriorated the quality of the canter. Of course, if the horse was born with a good canter, it's a little easier to bring it back than if you have to build a canter on a horse that was almost born without, or that it was born with a very difficult canter. So, by the way, before I talk about things you can do to improve it, I want to mention two things that are important here in this context. One is that the old masters said that the trot work develops the canter, and they all warned against cantering the young horse too soon, because they said if you do that, you will destroy what you've built with the walk and trot work. So take your time, don't rush it. But that was 200-300 years ago, when a lot of horses didn't have good canters to begin with. Today, a lot of modern breeds have much, much better canters than back then, so they can often begin working on the canter earlier. Yeah, the other thing is that the canter does not improve if you canter more. That always reminds me of something I read many years ago by John Lyons, who said that the horse perfects whatever he practices, right? So if the horse has a downhill 4-beat canter on the forehand, and now you think it will improve if you canter for miles and miles and miles, then all you end up doing is practicing the downhill 4-beat canter, and the horse will perfect that canter instead of developing a good canter, right? So this is important. So I would always wait with canter work until I have a good feeling in the walk and trot, that the horses are well balanced at the walk and the trot. A good canter also requires strength, more strength than people realize. To have a round, bouncy, soft uphill canter, the horses have to have quite a bit of strength in their hind legs and their abdominal muscles. That's why also they often don't last that long in the beginning. They can maintain a good quality canter for a certain distance, and then they fall out, they expire and need a quick break, and then maybe you can canter again. So all little details that are important. In terms of bad quality canter, there are some problems that are very common, very typical. Most horses with a bad canter have a flat, scratchy, quick canter, like into the ground, where the withers don't rise above the top of the croup. So it's this quick, choppy canter that's very uncomfortable to ride. Some horses have rhythm impurities, like, for example, a four-beat canter where the outside front touches down before the inside hind. That feels very bumpy, very uncomfortable. It's the byproduct of the horse cantering on the forehand. Then there are horses that uh, have a lateral canter. That's a version of the four beat where the lateral pairs of legs are coordinated more closely than the main diagonal. Like the main diagonal is dissolved a little bit, and I mean the outside front still touches down before the inside hind, but it looks like the outside pair of legs moves together and the inside pair of legs moves together, and that main diagonal is basically gone. So those are typically problems that were ridden into the horse. The four-beat canter on the forehand comes from people trying to collect with the reins or making the horse round with the reins. If they hold too much, they tip the horse onto the forehand and then the outside front touches down too soon. Horses that are croup high, of course, they're a little bit more likely to end up with a four-beat canter because the croup is higher than the withers, and in order to canter uphill, the withers have to be lifted above the croup. So it's a much bigger effort for a croup high horse than for a horse that's level. And yeah, the lateral canter usually also comes from people who want to collect the horse by force, by holding or pulling with the reins and then sitting hard onto the horse's back so that the back drops, gets rigid. Hind legs can't engage anymore, and then the lots of weight in the reins just blocks the movement, and so the footfall sequence changes, and becomes impure. So in when you're riding a horse that has a faulty canter like that, you have to look at, what does the horse do exactly? What issue does he have? And then you can start to address it, right? You can um, change the canter a little bit like a sculptor or like a potter, right? You can amplify aspects of the stride, you can reduce aspects of the stride. Most horses don't lift the forehand enough, right? So they're more or less on the forehand. You get the feeling that they're cantering into the ground, and that also makes the canter feel scratchy and flat. You don't get that round, bouncy ball feeling when the horse is on the forehand. And you can fix that by lifting the withers more, right? So you have to to know and feel the three parts of the stride, right? The first beat when the outside hind leg lands after the suspension phase, the withers come up, the whole forehand lifts. And if the horse doesn't lift the forehand enough by himself, you can support that, you can amplify that. The second beat is the main diagonal touching down, inside hind, outside front. That's a movement where the forehand lowers, it lands, so to speak, and the inside hind leg and the outside front touch down together, or they should touch down together, and the inside hind should flex under the body mass. If the inside hind leg doesn't flex, if it hits the ground and extends the joints, then you get a very hard, uncomfortable feeling. It's like somebody is kicking you in the butt, so to speak. So in order to make that hard, jarring canter soft, you have to soften the inside hind. You have to make that vertically supple and flexible. The third beat is inside front on the ground. That's the lowest part of the beat where the haunches start to lift up and the croup comes up a little bit. When you take a picture in that moment, every horse looks on the forehand. It's the worst possible moment to take a picture because no horse looks good in that moment. Yeah, and then of course afterwards, after the third beat, you have the suspension phase where the inside front pushes off and then the forehand comes up and then the outside hind leg lands again. So you can amplify these. If you can start with the outside hind, first beat of the canter. You can increase the lift of the forehand by um, moving a little actively up with your own seat. So instead of being passive and letting the horse lift you, you could meet the horse halfway, create a little space under your pelvic floor, under your seat bones, by using the momentum of the horse's stride. It's like a wave essentially, and you emphasize the upswing of that stride, where in that moment you can support yourself with the inside of your knee joints, like no gripping, but just rest on the inside of your knees and let your pelvis swing up so you create space. And you ask or allow the horse basically to fill that space. If he has enough energy, enough power, he may automatically fill that space. If he doesn't, if there's not enough activity behind, you may have to drive a little bit with your lower legs to create more jump. I'll talk about that in a minute. Um, so if you emphasize the up moment, up movement, you create a little room for the horse's back and withers to lift up. You could support this by stepping into the outside stirrup a little bit. It's like you press the outside hind into the ground, and that allows the withers to come up more. The outside hind can then lift the forehand more. You can also apply a little half hold on the outside rein, for example. And to me, that often feels like I pause a video, at that moment, and then you feel like you linger a split second longer at that highest point of the stride. And you feel like you can lift the forehand a few centimeters higher and then stay there for a moment before you continue. Most horses, if they were a little quick and rushy in the canter, they will slow down by themselves if you lift the forehand higher, because lifting the forehand more means that hind legs have to support more weight, so more work for the hind legs, and that tends to make them slow down, which is good if you had a horse that was too quick and too rushy, right? So that can work really well. A lot of horses don't have enough jump. They don't have enough energy, or they don't jump far enough under the body, because if the hind legs step short, you can't reach them with the body weight. You can't flex them, so they just lift the croup and run into the forehand, into the ground, and they canter on the forehand. So before you can then shift the weight back, you have to have the hind legs underneath you, which means you may have to drive a little bit with your legs and create more jump. And then once the hind legs have jumped underneath, you may have to then lift the forehand up. So for activating the hind legs, creating more jump, you have several options actually. You could drive with your outside lower leg when the outside shoulder blade comes back. So that's the second half of the second beat. When the main diagonal touches down, there's a moment when you have three legs on the ground, right? Both hind legs, outside front. And then the outside hind starts to lift. The main diagonal stays on the ground a split second longer than the outside hind lifts. And then the diagonal lifts and the inside front touches down, right? So you could drive with your outside leg either when in the second beat, when the outside front is starting to lift, or you could drive when in the third beat when the main diagonal lifts off too. you could, instead of driving with the outside leg, you could drive with the inside leg in the third beat when the main diagonal lifts and the inside shoulder blade comes back. So, and the third option you have is in the suspension phase, when the front end starts to come up and the hind legs start to come under. You could drive with outside, inside, or both. Just quick, has to be a quick little impulse and bring the hind legs a little bit more underneath you, create a little more jump. It's actually good if you vary it a little bit, so you don't drive with the same leg all the time, but sometimes drive with the outside, sometimes drive with the inside, sometimes drive with both. And that tends to loosen up maybe the belly muscles a little bit too, and then creates a little bit more jump. And so you could drive one or two strides and then lift the forehand one or two strides. Because a lot of horses respond to a driving aid by just going faster. So that's why you have to then lift the forehand so that the weight shift to the hind legs slows the tempo down a little bit. There's another option for the inside leg. You can drive with your inside leg when the outside hind is on the ground and the forehand comes up. Then you don't create more jump with the inside leg, but you create more engagement. And you can actually almost lift the forehand a little bit more with your inside leg in that moment. It's something that you can try in canter periods, for example, right? Or when you ride small vaulters, or if you ride haunches in vaulters or something, you can see, in the moment where the withers come up, drive with your inside leg and see if you can lift the forehand a little bit more with the help of your inside leg. So that's an alternative option for lifting the seat and stepping into the outside hind, half vaulting on the outside rein. You can also lift with your inside leg a little bit. That can be a good option, especially if the horse is already a little bit farther along. Another thing that works really well is stirrup stepping sequences. With stirrup stepping, you can ground the legs, you can purify the rhythm, you can create more bounce, and you can make the horse rounder, you can make the horse, I don't know, lift the forehand, you can make the horse sit on the inside hind and flex the inside hind leg a little bit more. There's a number of stepping sequences that you can use. One that has a nice effect is to step into the inside front first, then the outside front, then the outside hind. And outside hind you can use twice or three times, so that overall there's more weight on the hind legs than on the forehand. Stepping into the inside front in the canter has a bit of a straightening effect, right? Because the canter has an asymmetrical footfall sequence, which makes it a little susceptible to crookedness. Horses like to push the haunches in, because the inside hind leg has to reach more forward than the outside one. The inside hip has to be a little ahead of the outside hip, and so on. And so that makes the horses evade into a bit of a haunches in position pretty easily. You can fix that by stepping into the inside front leg. So you put a little pressure on the inside stirrup when in the third beat at the lowest point of the stride, when the inside front is down. You can use your outside rein a little bit at the same time. So the weight of the outside shoulder is then moved onto the inside front, and you can literally move the shoulder a little to the inside by stepping into the inside front. So you're aligning the horse better on your line. Stepping into a front leg also has the effect of making the horse rounder, so they will tend to release the poll and lift the withers. If you have a horse that tends to drop the back and stick the underneck out, stepping into the front legs can help to relax the underneck and the poll, and to lift the withers in the back. And Now, in the pattern I mentioned, you would go from inside front to outside front. Yeah, so you step into the outside stirrup in the second beat, next canter stride, right? Only one stirrup step per stride, otherwise it gets too fast, too hectic. So first canter stride inside front, second canter stride outside front, and outside stirrup when your seat gets pulled forward and um, the main diagonal touches down. And then in the third canter stride, outside stirrup when the withers come up. So then your weight flows into the outside hind leg. You can add the outside rein if you like. You don't have to maybe repeat that. So it would be a four stride sequence, inside front, outside hind. So that ends with lifting the withers. Um, that often has a nice suppling effect. And stepping into the front legs first makes the horse maybe a little bit rounder, and they feel a little bit more through the back. And then once the horse feels round and through, you can lift the forehand and then collect more, so to speak, by lifting the withers. You could keep going and add the inside hind in stride number, 5 and 6. You could then step into the inside stirrup when your seat gets pulled forward, and then you um, shift the weight into the inside hind leg, and you can soften that inside hind leg. So then you've gone all the way around, right? So if you stop with the outside hind, it would be a triangle shape, so that includes the two front legs and the outside hind. But you could add the inside hind leg, and then it's a square or a circle where all four legs are addressed. Another one that works really well that I've used a lot for horses that had like a lateral canter, for example, that's the sequence of inside front first, then outside hind, and then both stirrups, right? So you separate the three beats of the canter stride with that sequence, right? So you begin with the inside front. The horses won't uh, fight that. If you directly try to target a hind leg and shift the weight into a hind leg, some horses brace against it because it's more work and maybe they don't like it so much. But if you step into a front leg, they usually don't object to that because that feels a little bit easier and inviting. So you could go inside front to straighten the horse and move the shoulders a little more in front of the inside hind. And then next canter stride, step into the outside hind, which means you initially emphasize the lowest point of the stride, then you emphasize the highest point of the stride. That creates more bounce. So if a horse has a flat canter, inside front, outside hind creates more of a rocking horse motion, and it creates more height in the canter stride. And then in your third canter stride, you could step into both stirrups when your seat gets pulled forward, so the main diagonal touches down, and you can unite that main diagonal. If you have a horse where the main diagonal doesn't touch down together, then these stepping into both stirrups when your seat gets pulled forward can fix that problem. It can join the two legs of the main diagonal. If you do it too much, it tends to flatten the canter because, of course, when the main diagonal touches down, the body lands, right? The forehand comes down, so you'd be emphasizing a downward motion of the forehand. That's why you have to balance that out by emphasizing the outside hind leg and the withers coming up, so you're not losing the bounciness of the canter. You can also, instead of going inside front, outside hind, both, you could go outside hind, both, outside hind. That would emphasize the lift of the forehand very much. So if you have a horse that four beats, where the outside front touches down before the inside hind, then maybe something like that would be good. Outside hind, so lift the forehand and then try to make the main diagonal touch down together, and then lift the forehand again, outside, both, outside, so that emphasizes the lift more. There are a few horses, minority, who lift the forehand too much. So I've known some PREs who did that, and they feel like a rocking horse. They go a lot up and down, but you feel like you're not moving really. You're not. There's no forward ground cover, and they can sometimes get a little almost panicky a little, or they end up leaning heavily on the reins because they overload their own haunches, so it becomes uncomfortable. So they're getting heavy, or they get a little panicky in the canter, get scared because they hurt themselves essentially. And with those horses, it helps if you step into a front leg a couple of strides with the idea of lowering the forehand so it doesn't lift excessively high. And then you could emphasize the second beat with a driving seat aid to lengthen the stride. And then all of a sudden they canter like a normal horse. Yeah, that's it's kind of interesting, right? That's doesn't happen that often. But when you have one where you feel like it's all up and down and we're not going anywhere, the horse is not um, covering any ground, then you have to increase the pushing power. And on this rocking horse that goes too much up and down, I would yeah, lower the forehand and then let the inside hind leg push more. Um, Whereas most horses will tend to be a little quick and rushy, and when you lengthen the stride, they go more and more downhill and they get faster and faster. So with those horses, I would ask the outside hind to push. So when the withers come up, I would use my seat to ask the horse to push up and forward. So I maintain the uphill balance as I'm lengthening. And in order to bring the horse back from the medium canter or extended canter, I would not half halt, right? Because a lot of people will half halt like in the second beat, and then they shut the canter down, and the horse falls on the forehand or falls out and breaks to the trot. So, in order to maintain the bounce and the energy and the uphill balance as you return from your medium canter, for example, to a more collected canter, I would actually drive the hind legs with the lower legs so they jump more underneath, and then I would lift the forehand up more in the first beat so that you lift the forehand more and more and more, and the more you lift the forehand in the canter, the shorter the canter stride becomes. So you hardly need any rein in a sense. You're collecting the horse with your legs and your seat, by asking the hind legs to jump under and by lifting the forehand with up with your seat. And then as you hit the end of your long side or diagonal, the horse still has balance and impulsion and energy, and then you come around, the first corner of the next long side, and you can ride a movement. Like if you compete and you have to do stuff in the canter, flying changes or half passes or something like that after a medium or extended canter, it's important that you still have power and impulsion and the horse is just still bouncing in the canter. Whereas if you put the brakes on and you hold, then you make the canter flat, you lose impulsion, and then by the time you get to the next long side or next diagonal, there's not enough canter left, and the horse can't do the next movement very well. And so collecting by lifting the forehead and activating the hind legs makes a big difference. That really helps. Another thing I should mention is if you have a horse where you feel that forward and backward movement in your pelvis a lot, and the horse is on the forehand, you can change that by reducing the forward motion that you feel in your pelvis and increasing the upward motion. Like if you feel a very big, long, powerful forward motion, there's probably very little upward motion. And you can change the ratio from forward to up, right? You can follow for a split second as the horse pulls your seat forward, and then you direct the rest up. So you're not diminishing the movement, you're not reducing the amount of the movement, you're redirecting it so that there's way more movement up than forward. And that improves the balance, that starts to collect the horse, and typically they slow down. So that's another important thing. Um, when I was young, we were often told that we should sweep the saddle from back to front with our seat, because of course that's sort of the natural movement of the horse's canter, that in the second beat it pulls your seat forward. But if you follow along, or if you accentuate that, you can end up driving the horse onto the forehand so that they get flat and fast and heavy in the reins, or they curl up, depending on how the neck is shaped. So you have to be careful with how much you follow along. It's good if you observe, how does my horse canter? What do I feel in the canter, and what aspect do I need to increase or make larger? Which aspect do I need to diminish? So you can after you've analyzed that, you can then start playing with that. So you can use your seat for engaging, for lifting the withers, or you can sink into the inside hind to flex it more. And you can do your stirrup stepping exercises, or this combination of driving with the lower leg so the horse jumps and then lifting the forehand up. That often works. And of course, you can also do exercises. Um, there's all kinds, what can work really well is if you ask the horse for a little bit of haunches in, and then, 3 strides maybe, and then a little bit of shoulder 4 to shoulder in, and then you could turn the shoulder into either a volte or a small square. And then when you're done with the volte or the square, you could come again, engage the outside hind with a little haunches in, engage the inside hind with a little shoulder in, and turn the shoulder. That often makes the horse nice and compact, because you bring both hind legs under the body, and turning the shoulder has a straightening effect. It brings the forehand in front of the inside hind leg. So that can be very beneficial. Transitions in a haunches in position can be good. Walk to canter transitions, for example, they can be really good. That helps you also to separate the hind legs. In a haunches in, you can get, if a horse canters a little bit like a bunny hops, where the hind legs are almost next to each other, you can fix that with transitions in a haunches in, where the inside hind leg can then reach more forward under the body, and you can canter 3 strides or 4 and walk, and then canter 3 or 4 strides and walk. That gives you more uphill canter, which is hard for the horse, takes a lot of strength, but it can improve the balance. You can do this on straight lines, you can do this on circles. During the Renaissance and the Baroque era, the riders used to do that a lot. I think their horses probably didn't have the best canter to begin with. So they waited a long time. They waited until they could piaffe and passage, according to de la Guérinière. And then they would start with the canter work, and they did a lot of haunches in canter and half passes and so on. And you'll feel that if you can do a walk haunches in, canter depart to canter haunches in without changing the angle, the horse has to lift the forehand more. And if you lift the forehand enough, you get a different kind of 4-beat canter, right? Then the inside hind will touch down before the outside front. That's the so-called school canter. And if you lift the forehand even more, then you get a 2-beat canter, where the hind legs jump together, the front end lifts up, and alternates, like front legs up, hind legs jump, front legs down, hind legs kind of follow, and so it's like it's a terre à terre, Yeah, basically it's a two-beat canter in a haunches in position. If you do the same thing on a single track straight ahead, it used to be called a mesea. It's like lots of little levads, where the front legs lift up, front legs touch down, hind legs leap forward a little, front legs lift up, and so on. It's this series of little hops. So that crosses into high school dressage, what you call. Yeah, so you see how the footfall sequence of the canter can change, as you're changing the balance. If the horse is very on the forehand, you have a negative four-beat canter where the outside front touches down before the inside hind. When you have a very high degree of collection, you have a good four-beat where the inside hind touches down before the outside front, and you can even increase the collection so that it becomes a two-beat movement. And that two-beat canter movement can then become the launch point for a capriole, for example. If you do this on a single track, um, you feel how the horse starts to bounce and bounces higher, and then at some point they can push themselves up, straight up into the air and then kick out, and then you have a capriole. So that is a progression, right? But so yeah, let me look at some of the questions here. Pauline Burns is saying, this is very valuable. My horse is gated, unregistered Tennessee Walker, wonderful trail horse, very smart. He did very well this year in obstacle competitions, earning his first grand champion belt buckle in the intermediate division of an obstacle series. Huh? Congratulations. He came in third in the advanced division of equine trail sports, obstacles along a trail. In order to improve in the obstacle competitions in the advanced division, I need to improve his canter for consistency. Some obstacles require loping or cantering in between obstacles. My horse makes good time at the running walk, but most judges require the canter. My horse is improving. I've done dressage training with him, which has helped tremendously, and he has great lateral work. It does help him to canter uphill as it encourages him to be on his haunches. I'm now working on canter transitions so they can be smooth. He has very rough transitions. My horse is also getting monthly chiropractic treatments, and I found he has some hip issues. Okay. Yeah, I had students with Tennessee Walkers in the past, and they seem to do everything in four beats. Rein back, canter. Everything was four beat, right? And the ones with the big lick, they have an exaggerated up and down movement. So that you'd have to look then what kind of a canter does your horse have. If it's a very slow canter with lots of up and down, you may actually have to step into maybe the inside front leg a couple of times to level out, so it's a little bit more horizontal balance, and maybe then drive with your lower legs a couple of strides to create a little quicker jump. You could drive with your outside leg in the second beat, a split second before the outside hind lifts. That would speed up the tempo, right? And if your horse's canter is too slow, then you need to speed up a little bit, and that second beat with your outside leg would be a good moment to try that. And then, of course, once he is a little quicker, it could be that he falls on the forehand, and you then have to lift the forehand again. So then you have to explain to him, what kind of canter you want. You can say, okay, a little quicker, not quite so high, a little quicker. And then, okay, not quite that far down with the forehand, lift up again. Not quite as much because he might go too high, too low, with the forehand until he understands what you want. So it could be that first you tell him lower the forehand a little, now jump a little bit more. Now lift the forehand because you got too much on the forehand. Okay, now it's too high in front. Now lower again. Now jump a little bit more. Right? So it takes a little while until the horse gets a clear picture of what you want to do and until he has the coordination to do it. If it's the opposite, if he's on the forehand and fast, then of course you'd have to emphasize the lifting of the forehand. And by lifting the forehand, hopefully he'll slow down a little bit. Or you could try, also, you could also go outside stirrup, front, rear. So you walk him a little bit and then step into the inside hind leg a couple of times to flex the inside hind so it becomes a softer, smoother canter. So you have to experiment a little bit with it essentially. And Pauline also said, does improving haunches in exercises help improve the canter? Yeah, like I said, right? You can alternate with a little bit haunches in, a little bit shoulder for, shoulder in, or hard transitions in the haunches in. You could do squares or diamonds, right? In haunches in position at the walk, and then you could canter on the straight lines of this square or the diamond, and then before you come to the next corner, walk, ride a quarter pirouette, and then canter again, and then walk, turn the shoulder, canter, and then once he is stronger, you could do it the other way around, right? Walk the straight line in haunches in. Just before you get to the corner, ask for the canter, ride a quarter pirouette in the canter, walk. Yeah. Prepare him again on that straight line in the haunches in, canter, quarter pirouette, walk, right? So that would be a collecting exercise that kind of starts training the pirouettes with your horse. So, yeah. Oh, Pauline says also my horse is lateral oriented in his gait, prefers a pace than running walk. Thank you for recommendations for helping correct the lateral canter. Yeah, so there you need to unite the main diagonal. And like I said, inside front, outside hind, both would be good for that. And also when you're trotting, use diagonal stepping sequences, like anything outside front, both, inside hind, or outside front, inside hind, both. Just rock the weight back and forth between inside hind and outside front. And so it's outside, inside, both in any combination, in any sequence, will work for that. So rocking the weight front to back, back to front, also tends to lift the back and make the horse rounder. So that often has a really good effect. Mhm. And Marianne Lemon says you always say not to keep on going in the canter. My horse has a really flat left canter. She starts off with a giant leap, and the following two jumps are straight into the ground on the forehand. She can't keep the canter for long. How can you train the canter just with 3 strides, or do I push her onto more strides so I have more opportunity to alter her canter? Um, yeah, sometimes that can be tricky. I mean, you don't want to get caught in a loop where the horse does 1 or 2 strides and falls out. That can happen, and then in that case, you have to ask the horse to do a couple more. But in basically, I would prepare the horse for the canter as best I can with walk or trot. I would try to find an exercise that balances the horse in such a way that your chances getting a good canter are as high as possible. And then ask for the transition, canter for as many strides as the horse can maintain a decent balance, and then walk. And then sometimes it's good to actually drop the reins for a second, maybe walk half a circle or a circle on a loose rein, then so the horse can just relax for a moment, then pick the reins up, put them together, maybe do the same thing in the other direction, prepare, ask for the canter, see how many strides you can get in a good balance, and see if you can influence, like once he is in the canter, can you now influence it? Like if the horse falls on the forehand, could you do something to keep the withers up in the air? And do you need to drive so you get more jump? Maybe the horse falls on the forehand because the hind legs stop moving, so the horse gets dumped on the forehand. In that case, you would have to drive with your lower legs and then lift the wither. So that would be one of those cases: drive, lift, and then see how far you can go. But initially it won't be very, very long because the horse won't have the strength yet, right? So keep that in mind. But over the weeks and months, you should see that the horse can last longer and longer and longer. Maybe initially it's 3 good strides, then maybe it's half a circle, then maybe it's one circle, maybe then a circle and a long side, and maybe then a circle and 2 long sides or something like that, or 2 circles and a long side. Right? I would also, you know, even if you start on a circle, I would try to go down the long side, maybe do a circle at A, then straight, then do a middle circle, right? At E or B, and then straight again, circle at C, something like that. So it's not all circles. So yeah. So I would build it gradually, basically. Yeah, Pauline says my horse tends to canter too fast. Yeah, then in that case, lift the forehand and see if that will slow him down, and try to visualize a video that you pause at the highest point, stay there, and then continue. So, okay, Pauline says he's also flat shot, does not have the big lick. Oh, good, that's good. Maya Lemons here says my horse is indeed haunches high, so on the forehand, her right lead canter has really improved with your tips from what by how to. Her left is still terrible. Interesting, huh? Also, work in hand helps. Teaching the horse half steps or piaffe improves the canter quite a bit. If that's an option for you, I would do that. Um, that helps to shift the balance. Um, yeah, with a lot of horses, you have to get them into a fairly collected balance and maybe arrange it so your canter part is towards into a small space, towards the wall or into a corner where the horse can see there is very little space and I cannot just take off. I have to sit and lift. Otherwise, I'm going to bump into the wall. So psychologically, that can really help. Whereas if you have a horse that is a little sucked back and doesn't have enough pushing power, doesn't have enough energy there, you want to make the canter inviting by cantering into the wide open space of the arena. If you take a horse that's a little behind the aids, a little sucked back anyway, and you try to canter into a small space, they either won't canter at all or they're completely behind you, completely behind the aids. So with these horses that tend to suck back, you may have to start the canter from a very lively, active working trot. So you take that momentum and the power of the trot with you into the canter. So every horse requires a little bit different approach. You have to know the horse and assess what's the issue. Pauline says leaving his head alone seems to help. Thank you for suggestions. Haunches in and shoulders in. Then transitions and canter, again, very helpful. Also stirrup stepping, you're welcome. Marianne Lemon says, I trained the canter now with haunches and canter from walk and trot. Yeah, that can be beneficial. Definitely. Also, if your horse gets very crooked, you can start from a renvers position. So you could go counter shoulder in to bring the outside hind leg underneath you, turn the horse into renvers, sit on that outside hind in terms of the arena, then change the bend and ask for the canter. So that, because if you just go from straight to canter, the horse may throw the shoulders out and the haunches in. But if you start from a renvers position and the horse moves the shoulders a little out, he'll end up straight, right? Whereas if you start straight and then he throws the shoulders out or the haunches in, then he's crooked in the canter, right? So that can sometimes help. Or ride shoulder in and then ride a 90-degree turn. Like, if you think of riding a square or a diamond or a rectangle, shoulder in on the straight lines of the pattern, and then ride a corner wherever you are, and into that corner, ask for the canter. Then you're basically turning the shoulder to the inside as you're asking for the canter, and the horse can't get crooked in that moment, or it would be much more difficult to get crooked. So Yeah. So then Catherine Barrett says, I have an off the track thoroughbred, have had him a year just learning walking, trotting around, just started cantering 3 months ago for short periods. He has developed a regular rhythm, but tends to be on the forehand. Also has trouble with a downward transition in canter, uneven and bumpy. Yeah, thoroughbreds tend to have a good canter because that's what they're bred for. But because they're bred for speed, they also tend to be a little bit downhill. So depending on the age, you can pick an arena pattern to prepare where he needs to sit behind, lift in front because he needs to control his speed so that he doesn't bump into the wall. And down transitions, I would prepare by lifting the forehand for several strides. So as you're thinking, okay, I want to come back from canter to walk or canter to trot, lift the withers in the first beat. When the outside hind is down, the withers come up. Um, Lift the forehand up, maybe step into the outside hind, maybe half fall into the outside rein. And if find out how far can you lift the forehead, not the head, but the whole shoulder area and withers. How high can you lift that? Because a lot of horses then are pretty happy to come back from the canter to the trot or the walk because cantering with that much collection and that much lift of the forehand um, is a lot of hard work. So they can't last in that uphill balance very long. And that it's easy to bring them back to trot or walk. And they should land in a fairly balanced walk or trot if you lifted the forehand enough beforehand. So that's always worked pretty well for me. My ancestor's training the passage at the moment. She can last a couple of steps. Just found out she probably has a muscle disease. Checking DNA at the moment for PSSM. This might influence her strength. Yeah, it can create problems also in terms of suppleness and so on. But yeah, it's good that you check that with your vet and yeah, see what they come up with if you need to adjust the feeding program maybe. Okay, so there are some comments and questions in the chat. Let me look at those. Rochelle says, in looking for a young horse, what would you look for in the canter, or can it always be trained? Sales videos seem to focus on forward expressive trot, but less on canter. Are there breeds that canter better naturally? Yeah. Um, in a sales video, a lot of sellers focus on big trots because the competition tests are sort of they revolve around the medium and extended trot. So people sometimes neglect the canter. Um, the canter should look easy, lofty. If you watch the horse at liberty when they move around, do they choose the canter for covering short distances, or do they trot? I mean, there are horses that would much rather canter a couple of strides than trot, and there are horses that will never ever canter voluntarily unless they're really in a hurry and it's a long distance, and then they gallop flat out, right? So you'd like to see a horse that in the pasture on his own chooses the canter when it's not necessary, so to speak, and choose a horse that does some flying changes in the pasture at play. If you have a horse that never does flying changes, or if a horse that's perfectly happy cross cantering for long distances, then the canter will be a lot of work, probably. But if you have a horse that has no problem cantering and has no problems doing flying changes when he's playing, by himself, that's usually a good sign. Um, there are breeds that tend to have a better canter. There are breeds that don't have a good canter. Um, Traditional driving horse breeds often don't have very good canters. like the Frisians didn't used to have a good canter, but that's changed because they became so popular as riding horses. So now you find Frisians that have quite good canters and they can easily go to the FEI levels. Uh, some breeds have driving horse lines, like some of the Lipizzanes, Cladrubers, PREs, and so on. The old driving horse lines tend to have good trots, but not such great canters. Um, Modern sport horses usually have good canter too, because they have so much movement and they're so bouncy in general that they typically have a pretty good canter. Thoroughbreds were bred for cantering, so they tend to have a good canter, even if it can be a little quick and a little bit downhill, but that can be trained, that can be changed. Um, Gaited horses tend to have difficult canters or just sorting the different gaits and keeping them nice and separate is quite a task with some gaited horses. Standard breds that were bred for trotting, harness racing, they typically have a very difficult canter. So that's not something I would recommend if you want to compete at the upper levels in dressage. That is a huge job to train them to canter nicely. I mean, I've had one student in a clinic with a trotting horse that had a pretty good canter, but she had already worked with that horse for a number of years by the time she came to me. And most of the others that I've worked with, they were difficult um, because they were not trained for, not bred for it, and then the canter often gets trained out of them. They get punished if they canter. If they're trained at the racetrack for harness racing, then that creates additional problems. So yeah, anyway. But yeah, look at the individual horse, and it's good if you can watch them move free and see what they choose to do. Then Maria Blomen says in the first beat, lifting your seat and stepping into the outside hind can both allow more room for the forehand to lift. Am I right in thinking that you would not use the two methods together? No, you can actually. You can do that. She says, I can't picture how you could press down and lift at the same time. So could you describe how you would alternate the two methods? Uh, it's totally free. It's totally up to you, but you can. I mean, it's almost, if you step down or push down with your leg, you can use that downward push to lift you up too, in addition. So instead of only resting on the insides of your knees and just surfing the wave of the back and swinging up, you could really uh, use that downward pressure into the outside stirrup to help you lift more. It's a possibility. Best thing would be to experiment with those, canter, and then see if you want to accentuate the lifting of the forehand, what would you do? I mean, you can just go by intuition and try to join the upward movement more and try to make it bigger. And then you could go back and analyze, okay, how did I do that exactly? For some people, it works better if they just go by feel and just try to feel that moment when the withers come up and just make that bigger, just go with that more. And then if it works and you feel like, okay, my horse is changing shape, is changing balance, then you can go uh, reverse engineer it and think, okay, how did I do that exactly? What did I do? And do it again and then pay close attention to what am I doing? Or you could go, more, like an engineer and say, okay, now I'll do this and now I'll do that, and then compare, what works better, or can I combine the two? That's the kind of stuff I've always done. I've always just played with it, experimented with it, and that's how I made a lot of discoveries by just trying it, see if it works, see if I can make it work, so yeah. So Joyce Carrick says I use the short bits of canter already, but my horse tends to be a dirty stopper. She anticipates the short canter and goes down to trot before I ask any suggestions. I would pay attention to see if there are warning signs. Usually 1, 2, 3 strides before they break, there are signs where something changes. It could be a very tiny little detail. And when you've identified that, you could apply a quick driving aid. You could it could be a leg aid, it could be a tickle with the whip, you could even pluck your tongue and touch with a whip or touch with a leg, and see if you can get a couple more strides at least, so that before they break, you're faster than the horse. Before they break, you give the aid and say, keep going, tap tap with a whip or drive with your lower leg or mix it. Sometimes use the touch of the whip, sometimes use a touch of the leg, and see if you can delay the inevitable. Yeah. I mean, since cantering takes a lot of strength, you can't expect them to canter for 10 minutes. But if you can get another 2 or 3 strides before they break, that would already be a success. And then hopefully they get a little bit stronger and last longer. So yeah, look for the warning signs and then give the driving aid before the horse breaks, because once they're out of the canter, you can't really get a good canter by kicking them back into it. A lot of trainers recommend that. A lot of people do that. If the horse breaks and they kick, and then the horse may run into the canter, but then you have a downhill, poor quality canter, and that's not really helping. So if you can identify warning signs, and then next time it happens, as soon as the first warning sign shows up, drive, and hopefully the horse will stay in the canter at least, a couple more strides. So I've had horses like that who would do that, and then usually if you're quick enough, you can change the pattern a little bit. Okay, so it's been an hour. I have to do this again in German, unfortunately. I have to say goodbye. I know there are a couple more questions. I mean, if you're in our courses, if you're in Rise, just you know, repeat the question in the course or in the group, and then I can explain it there. But right now I have to run, unfortunately. So anyway, thank you for watching, and thank you for asking all the good questions. And maybe we'll see you soon. Bye.